welcome to this episode of the weekly News Roundup. We move now to Manipur, the northeastern state of India, which has been facing endless violence. It was in the month of May when the first clashes broke out in Manipur during a tribal solidarity march in the areas bordering Bishnupur and Churachandpur districts. Intermittent violence emerging from an ethnic conflict between Meitei and Kuki communities has continued to keep the state on the boil till now, claiming over 200 lives and injuring more than 1,000 people. Tens of thousands have fled their homes and some have taken shelter in government-run camps. According to data presented by the Inspector General of Police Operations, I.K. Muiva, earlier this month, over 5,000 cases of arson have been reported, which included more than 4,700 houses that were torched. Muiva said 386 religious structures have been vandalized through arson, of which 254 were churches and 132 were temples. Some of the most affected areas include the hill districts, where there is a strong presence of Naga and Kuki ethnic groups, and the valley districts, where the majority Meitei community resides. The rise of ethnic violence in Manipur has had a devastating impact on the state. The violence has also crippled the economy and disrupted the development of the state. We bring you this report.
Schools were ordered shut last week in the violence hit Manipur after a rocket attack by insurgents killed a civilian and wounded 6 others. A local government notice said all schools in the state would be closed to protect the safety of the students and teachers. Students said efforts must be made to stop this war as it is turning people into monsters. In recent years, the violence has intensified with multiple ethnic groups clashing in various parts of the state. The students are protesting, demanding action against those behind the recent drone and missile attacks and calling for the protection of the state's territorial and administrative integrity. They tried to march towards Raj Bhavan on Tuesday but were stopped by security forces. Tear gas shells were fired as student and women demonstrators clashed with security forces during the agitators' attempt to march towards Raj Bhavan to press for their demands to remove the DGP and security advisor to the Manipur government, officials said. Manipur University students also staged a protest rally and burned the effigy of Union Home Minister Amit Shah. At least 2 persons, including a woman and an ex-serviceman belonging to Kuki-Zo community, were killed in separate incidents, officials said. The latest casualties amid an escalation in violence in the strife-torn state. The women, Nejaho Lungdim, and the ex-serviceman Linkolal Mate, a former Havildar of Army's Assam Regiment, were both from Kangpokpi district. Lungdim's body with bomb splinter injuries was found in front of a church in Kangpokpi's Tangbu village, sources said. They suspected the woman was caught in crossfire as assailants attacked a CRPF camp near the village late on Sunday night. The body of Mate, a resident of Kangpokpi's Mokpung, was found with several injuries in Sekmai village of Imphal West district. Official sources said he had accidentally crossed into the village late Sunday night. Since ethnic violence erupted last year, Manipur has been virtually divided with so-called buffer zones guarded by central forces preventing warring communities Meiteis, who live in the valley, and Kuki-Zo, who live in the hill districts, from crossing into each other's territories. Imphal West falls in the valley region. Following the 2 incidents, a protest rally was held in Kangpokpi and Churachandpur. Meanwhile, in the valley, students organized protest rallies in different parts, particularly in Taubal and Imphal, demanding the removal of central forces from the state and protection of the indigenous communities. In Imphal, students tried to storm the official residences of Manipur Governor Lakshman Acharya and CM N. Biren Singh. The protest was brought under control. In Taubal, however, police used stun grenades and tear gas to disperse student protesters who retaliated by pelting stones. At least 20 people were injured. Internet services have been snapped for 5 days in the valley districts of Manipur, and indefinite curfew imposed in 3 of these districts amidst protests following a renewed escalation of violence in the state since September. Through an order, the Manipur Home Department has snapped not just mobile internet services but also list lines, VSATs, broadbands and VPN services for 5 days in the valley districts of Imphal West, Imphal East, Taubal, Bishnupur and Kaching. Significantly, the Home Department had initially issued an order for suspending internet services in the entire state and then issued an amended order in the evening restricted the move to these 5 districts. In defiance of the curfew that had already been imposed, the protesters began to move towards the high-security zone in Imphal, which includes Raj Bhavan and the Chief Minister's official residence. This resulted in a confrontation between protesters and the police security forces in Khairamabad that lasted several hours, in which security forces deployed tear gas shells. Over 60 protesters were injured and shifted to RIMS Imphal West for treatment, confirmed hospital authorities. The Manipur government has claimed curfew in Imphal East and West districts and prohibitory orders under Section 163(2) of BNSS in Taubal in view of the student protests.
From Manipur, we move to Vietnam, where at least 141 people have died as Super Typhoon Yagi, which hit Vietnam, continues to bring heavy rainfall, landslides and flooding. Thousands of people were seen stranded on rooftops in some northern provinces, while others posted desperate pleas for help on social media. Typhoon Yagi, Vietnam's most powerful storm in 30 years, has wreaked havoc across the north of the country, leaving 1.5 million people without power. The storm, which brought winds of nearly 200 km per hour speed, has damaged bridges, torn roofs of buildings, damaged factories and triggered widespread flooding and landslides, leaving 69 people still missing. Authorities have now issued flood and landslide warnings for 401 communes across 18 northern provinces. As well as the dead and missing, flooding and landslides have also injured at least 752 people, officials at the Ministry of Agriculture said. Before hitting Vietnam, Typhoon Yagi has left 24 people dead across southern China and the Philippines. We bring you this report.
More than 240 people have been injured by the typhoon, which brought winds of up to 203 km per hour and is Asia's most powerful storm so far this year. 10 cars and 2 scooters fell into the Red River following the collapse of the Feng Chau Bridge. Recently, dashcam footage showed the moment the Feng Chau Bridge in Phu Tho province gave way, plunging several vehicles into the waters below. Part of the 1,230 feet structure is still standing, and the military has been instructed to build a pontoon bridge across the gap as soon as possible. At least 44 of those who died in Vietnam were killed in landslides and flash floods, according to the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. Among them were a 68-year-old woman, a 1-year-old boy, and a newborn baby. The typhoon tore roofs from the building, uprooted trees and left widespread damage to infrastructure and factories in the north. Photos by Reuters news agency show the walls of an LG Electronics factory in Haiphong city that collapsed. Typhoon Yagi also cut power to millions of households and companies, flooded highways, disrupted telecommunication networks, uprooted thousands of trees and brought economic activity in many industrial hubs to a halt. The north of the country, densely populated and a major manufacturing hub for global tech firms including Samsung, is now battling serious flooding with several communities partially underwater. One-story homes in parts of Thai Nguyen and Yen Bai cities were almost completely submerged in the early hours of Tuesday, with residents waiting on the roofs for help. Rescue forces were trying to reach residential areas to evacuate old people and children. On social media, relatives of those stuck in floodwaters posted desperate pleas for help and supplies. Managers and workers at industrial parks and factories in Haiphong, a coastal city of 2 million, said they had no electricity and were trying to salvage equipment from plants where metal sheet roofing had been blown away as more rain was expected. The storm has also caused power blackouts and major disruptions to factories in northern Vietnam, which is a major production hub for global tech firms such as Samsung and Foxconn. The weather agency warned of more floods and landslides and said heavy rain and strong winds were expected in the capital Hanoi, a city of 8.5 million people. In Hanoi, communities along the swollen and fast-moving Red River, which flows through the capital, were also partially underwater, with people forced to evacuate. State-run power provider Evenining said that more than 5.7 million customers lost power during the weekend as dozens of power lines were broken. But later, electricity was restored to nearly 75% of those affected. Typhoon Yagi wreaked havoc on many factories and flooded warehouses in coastal export-oriented industrial hubs east of Hanoi, forcing closures with some only expected to resume full operations after weeks, executives said. The disruptions threaten global supply chains as Vietnam hosts large operations of multinationals that ship mostly to the United States, Europe and other developed nations.
In other latest news coming in, devastating floods in northeastern Nigeria have submerged entire residential areas, displaced tens of thousands of people and forced zoo animals to escape into the streets. At least 30 people have died in the floods, officials said. However, the death toll is likely to rise as authorities are still scrambling to rescue thousands of others feared trapped in their homes. The floods hit Borno State early this week after a dam impounding a regional river burst its banks. The heavy surge of water buried half the state capital, Maiduguri, damaging buildings and infrastructure. Authorities say more than 1 million people are affected, of which about 200,000 are displaced. Floods are not uncommon in northern Nigeria. However, experts say Maiduguri is seeing its worst floods in 30 years. We bring you this report.
Authorities say the floods were caused by the flow of excessive rainwater amid the rainy season, which lasts from June to September in the West African country. The Alaf Dam, located in the Kanduga community just a few kilometers outside Maiduguri, burst its banks on Monday after being overwhelmed by the heavy rainfall, officials say. The dam was built in 1986 to help farmers in Maiduguri with irrigation. In many instances, it also helps control flooding from the Enkata River, which on occasion gets higher than normal inflows from water sources that trace back to the massive Lake Chad. In 1994, heavy rains caused Alaf to break, inundating Maiduguri and its surrounding areas. In 2012, the dam broke and flooded communities nearby. The number of those affected in 1994 remains unclear, while a government report said multiple flood events across several states in 2012 killed 363 people and displaced 3.8 million. In many places, water levels have not receded. Although authorities are now helping with search and rescue, initially survivors were forced to wait for hours and were mostly helped by volunteers with minimal resources. Damaged septic tanks and flooded graveyards are also spurring fears of a rapid spread of infectious diseases, even as officials scramble to find shelter for those affected. Another concern is wild animals swimming in the floodwaters. Officials said the flood either killed or washed away 80% of the animals in the Sanda Karimi Park Zoo in Maiduguri. In a statement, the zoo authorities confirmed that dangerous animals had escaped and urged residents to be careful. Some deadly animals have been washed away into our communities like crocodiles and snakes. The statement read, "It is unclear how many animals were there in the zoo. It housed a wide array of wildlife, including endangered elephants and lions, as well as hyenas, crocodiles, and snakes." In videos posted on social media, an ostrich that appeared to have escaped from the zoo pranced around in the streets. Officials said they had managed to rescue and return the animal. Warnings about the floods appear to have been sounded months ago, although it is unclear why the country's national disaster agencies and the state government were not more prepared for the floods.
Moving now to the Ukraine-Russia war. Ukraine strikes Moscow in the biggest ever drone attack. In news coming in from Russia, a woman has been killed near Moscow and dozens of homes in that region have been damaged due to Ukrainian drone strikes, according to Russian officials. Russia's Ministry of Defense said its air defenses shot down 144 Ukrainian drones in 9 regions, with 20 alone over the Moscow region. Moscow Regional Governor Andrei Vorobyov said debris from the drone damaged at least 2 high-rise apartment buildings in the Ramenskoye district, setting several flats on fire. A 46-year-old woman was killed in Ramenskoye after the attack caused a fire on the 11th and 12th floors of the building, Vorobyov said. He said 43 people were evacuated to temporary accommodation centers. We bring you this report.
Emergency teams had been sent to a number of locations across the region, as well as to the area near the Sukovo airport and around the Domodedovo district, the site of one of Moscow's largest airports. Meanwhile, Moscow region Sikorsky Airport resumed operation in normal mode after flights were suspended earlier to ensure safety after drone attacks, Russian state news agency TASS reported. Russia's aviation authority Rosaviatsia lifted restrictions in Domodedovo, Sikorsky and Vnukovo airports earlier on Tuesday, but Sikorsky remained closed for flights during the investigation of the attack. The Ramenskoye district, some 50 kilometers southeast of the Kremlin, has a population of about 250,000 according to official data. Russia's short and Basta Telegram channels, which are close to the security services, posted videos with flames billowing from the multi-story residential building, saying 5 flats had been destroyed. In the region of Bryansk, close to the border with Ukraine, the Russian Defense Ministry said 72 drones were intercepted. Governor Alexander Bogomas described the attack as massive but said there were no casualties or damage, according to a message on the Telegram messaging app. More than 2.5 years since Moscow launched its full-scale invasion, Ukraine has fast-tracked the development of its domestic drone industry to enable it to attack Russia's energy, military and transport infrastructure.
Pope Francis concluded his 12-day visit to Asia and Oceania with an interfaith youth gathering at a Catholic college in Singapore. This was the last leg of the longest apostolic journey of his pontificate. In Singapore, he met with and spoke to government officials, diplomats and civil society members and presided over a grand papal mass for more than 50,000 Catholics in the National Stadium. Earlier, he visited Muslim-majority Indonesia and the Christian-majority nations of Papua New Guinea and Timor-Leste. In Indonesia, the Pope met with religious leaders at the famed Istiqlal Mosque in Jakarta, the largest in Southeast Asia, where he called for efforts for lasting peace and harmony in the world. In Papua New Guinea, Francis flew to the remote town of Vanimo to meet and encourage the faithful and missionaries. We bring you this report.
Pope Francis has completed his historic first visit to Southeast Asian and Pacific nations. The papal apostolic visit covered Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, East Timor and Singapore. Pope Francis left from Singapore for Rome after a demanding trip across Southeast Asia and Oceania, in which he urged action on climate change, pressed for interfaith dialogue and reinforced the Catholic Church presence in a region where it is a small minority. Pope Francis visited Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, East Timor and Singapore over a span of 12 days. The 87-year-old Pope, who in recent years has suffered bouts of ill health, appeared in good health throughout the trip, maintaining a packed schedule and headlining more than 40 events. Highlights of the journey included a trip to a township of some 12,000 people on the edge of the Papua New Guinean jungle, in which the Pope brought hundreds of kilograms of items to help support the local population, including medicines, clothing and toys for children. Pope Francis also celebrated Holy Mass in Timor-Leste with a crowd of about 7 lakh people, nearly half the country's total population. The trip was the longest since Francis became Pope in 2013. East Timor, which is 96% Catholic, was the only Catholic majority country of the Pope's tour. Francis' 12-day trip was the longest yet of his papacy and among the longest in papal history. Upon landing in Rome, Francis will have clocked nearly 33,000 kilometers. Pope Francis, who suffers from knee and back pain, used a wheelchair throughout the trip. He kept all his scheduled appointments. In Indonesia, the world's most populous Muslim majority nation, Pope Francis issued a joint declaration with the National Grand Imam calling for global climate action. In Singapore, he urged the government in one of the world's leading financial hubs to seek fair wages for the country's million-plus lower-paid foreign workers. Francis has prioritized trips to places never visited by a pope or where Catholics are a small minority. He was only the second pope to visit 3 of the 4 countries on his itinerary.
Former US President Donald Trump survived an assassination attempt at Trump International Golf Club in West Palm Beach on September 15th. Trump sent out a statement to supporters soon after to report that he was safe and well. The suspect, identified as 58-year-old Ryan Wesley Ruth of Hawaii, was able to get within 300 to 500 yards of Trump at a chain-link fence on the edge of the course, where he had an AK-47 and a GoPro camera set up, apparently to record the planned shooting. A Secret Service agent spotted and opened fire on Ruth as he put his gun through the fence. The suspect fled and was arrested on I-95 a short time later. According to Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, Trump's security detail was lighter because he isn't a sitting president, despite the previous attempt on his life in July. We bring you this report.
A man suspected in an apparent assassination attempt targeting former President Donald Trump was charged on Monday with federal gun crimes, his first court appearance in the final weeks of a White House race already touched by violence. 58-year-old Ryan Wesley Ruth faces charges of possessing a firearm despite a prior felony conviction and possessing a firearm with an obliterated serial number. Additional and more serious charges are possible as the investigation continues and Justice Department prosecutors seek an indictment from a grand jury. Ruth appeared briefly in federal court in West Palm Beach, where he answered perfunctory questions about his work status and income. During the hearing, Ruth said he works and makes about $3,000 a month but has zero savings. Ruth told the court he has no real estate or assets aside from 2 trucks in Hawaii that are worth about $1,000. Ruth could face up to 15 years in prison if convicted on the first charge and a possibly 5-year sentence on the second charge, officials said. Ruth was arrested after authorities spotted a firearm poking out of a shrubbery on the West Palm Beach golf course where Trump was playing. Prosecutors asked that he remain locked up as a flight risk. A federal magistrate set additional hearings for later this month. The authorities did not immediately reveal any new details about Ruth or allege a particular motive, but he left an online footprint that reveals shifting political views and intense outrage about world events. Ryan Wesley Ruth did not fire shots at Donald Trump, nor did he have a direct line of sight on the former president at his Florida golf course, officials said. U.S. Secret Service Director Ronald Ross said there was no evidence that Ruth had any information that Trump would be playing on the golf course on Sunday, where he staked out the scene for about 12 hours. Pictures of the would-be Trump assassin's backpack and gun have been released. The shooter was armed with an AK-47 and had a scope that could fit into a backpack. The shooter mounted a GoPro on the fence and was intent on filming what would have been the murder of a former president. The FBI alleged that Ruth was hiding on the edge of Trump's Florida golf course for nearly 12 hours before a Secret Service agent spotted him. Trump was unharmed and officials say security at his Mar-a-Lago residence is at the highest it could possibly be. It is the second apparent attempt on his life in 2 months. In his first public comment since the incident, Trump described hearing 4 or 5 shots in a live event on X. He went to add that he was safe and well.
Thanks so much for watching this episode. Until we meet next time, Stay blessed.